Aegon landed at the mouth of the Blackwater River and raised a primitive Aegon fort in the disputed land between Harren's and Argilac's kingdom, so that neither could decide whose problem he was. Adopting the customs of the Seven Kingdoms, Aegon unfurled his own banner with a red three-headed dragon breathing fire upon a black field. Visenya crowned him with a ruby-studded circlet of Valyrian steel, while Rhaenys hailed him as the first High King the continent had seen since the Dawn Age. As his lords and the gathered locals cheered him, Aegon named his loyal friend to a small council led by Robert Baratheon, whom he called my strong right hand. The title stuck, and a bastard became the first Hand of the King. But for now, Aegon's kingdom contained only a rocky island and a handful of fields. The other kings had larger armies, ships, castles, and thousands of years of rule. But Aegon had dragons. He had chosen for the words of his house, fire and blood. Before he was done, the rivers, fields, and skies would turn red.
Soon after his coronation, Aegon returned to the mouth of the Blackwater River, where he had first set foot on Westeros. A small town had since sprouted around his primitive fort. To honor their new master, the locals dubbed it King's Landing, though it looked more fit for a hedge knight, with wooden palisades, muddy streets, and piles of mangled swords carted in from every corner of the conquest. But when Aegon made it his court, wood became stone, black mud was buried beneath a red keep, and the collected swords of Aegon's foes were blasted by dragonfire and became a seat fit for the conqueror and the greatest dynasty this world has ever known, House Targaryen.
King's Landing is both a city and a curse. Aegon the Conqueror was the first king to land there. His first conquest, a tiny village at the mouth of the Blackwater River, where he raised a wooden fort. When it became clear that Aegon would earn his title, people flocked to the fort and renamed it King's Landing in his honor. The ploy succeeded, and Aegon chose King's Landing for his capital over older and more beautiful cities like Old Town and anywhere else. The currying of royal favor thus became the foundation of the city, and blood its bricks. Maegor the Cruel, Aegon's son, completed the city's famous Red Keep to hold the trappings of power, the royal family, the King's Guard, and the Iron Throne. To maintain the new castle's secrets, Maegor murdered all its masons and craftsmen at a feast, which he catered with the new castle servants, who soon found all its secrets for themselves. When the Faith Militant challenged his rule, Maegor raised their sept of remembrance to the ground with them inside at prayer and erected the dragon pit on the ashes.
Prince Maegor, a warrior who was proud and arrogant. Maegor agreed to marry the High Septon's niece to unite the faith and the crown, but then secretly wed a second wife in Valyrian ceremony, artfully combining bigamy and heresy. When word of it got out, the king was forced to exile Maegor and choose a Septon as his new hand. But the damage had been done. The king had trusted in family, and his brother had set off a rebellion that would claim his rule and his life.
When Aegon's heir wed his daughter to his son, the faith could brook such abomination no longer. The High Septon led the denunciation of the Targaryens, and all over Westeros, the Faith Militant took up their swords against the dynasty and its supporters. The Faith Militant set upon and punished the Septon who had performed the ceremony. A few of the Faith Militant's more militant members even scaled the walls of the castle and would have slain the king and his family had a knight of the King's Guard not intervened. Frightened, the king fled to Dragonstone, where he soon died of cramps. And so ascended the king's younger brother, Maegor the Cruel. His first act was to challenge the Faith Militant to kill him if they believed his rule to be ungodly. To the Order's eternal credit, they accepted. Ser Daemon Morrigan proposed a trial by 7, Ser Daemon and 6 of the Faith Militant, against the king and his 6 champions. It was a contest in which the kingdom itself was at stake, and the accounts and tales are many. But at the end of it, Maegor alone lived, proving that the throne was rightfully his. He mounted the Black Dragon, Balerion, and burnt down the Sept in King's Landing, while the Faith Militant were inside at morning prayers. The screams of the burning and dying men were said to echo throughout the city. Though Maegor had won the trial by 7, he demanded the complete destruction of the Faith Militant and the Faith itself, if necessary. He made war upon the Order wherever he found it. Yet the Faith Militant would not surrender, raising armies of their own and turning Maegor's own lords against him. The Father's justice may not always be swift, but it is certain. One morning, Maegor was found dead on the Iron Throne. No one knows how. Maegor's cruelty died with him. His successor saw the wisdom of a united crown and faith, and his hand reached an accord with the High Septon. As long as the Iron Throne defended the faith would put aside its own swords and its condemnation of the Targaryens.
The Dance of the Dragons. A stupid name for a Targaryen civil war where my ancestors danced away my birthright. Before the war, House Targaryen counted 18 dragons. By the end, we had 2, and nearly as few Targaryens. We would never be as powerful or as feared again. The dance began, as many dances do, with an old man and a young girl. The queen had failed to produce a son for her king, so he anointed his daughter, the Princess Rhaenyra, as his heir. But years later, the king remarried, and his new wife, Queen Alicent of House Hightower, gave him a son. Feeble and foolish, the old king refused to change the succession. He didn't even see how his court had split into 2 rival camps of blacks and greens, after the dresses that the princess and the queen had worn to some tourney. One night, a servant found the old king had died in his sleep, and ran to inform Queen Alicent. Protocol dictated that the bells would be rung and a raven sent to Dragonstone to summon the heir, Princess Rhaenyra, for her coronation. But Alicent had other plans. None were more surprised to hear of Prince Aegon's succession than Prince Aegon himself. At first, the fool rejected the crown, but his mother pointed out that his sister Rhaenyra would return such loyalty by taking his head. As the old king's true-born son, he'd always be a threat. Aegon relented. He was crowned in the Dragon Pit, and his wife and sister Helaena became queen. His brother Aemond flew off to win over the few great lords whose support Aegon didn't already have. The banner of the Gold Dragon flew over King's Landing and the Red Keep as Aegon, second of his name, ascended the Iron Throne. He would not sit it long.
One day, King's Landing looked up and saw 2 dragons circling their foul city. Daemon and Rhaenyra had come for her throne, for the city was defenseless. Aemond had taken the king's army from the city, and worse, he'd taken his dragon, Rhaegar. Seeing that resistance was hopeless, the small council surrendered the city, the Queen Mother Alicent, and the broken Queen Helaena. But not King Aegon. Somehow, despite his wounds and delirium, he had vanished from the city. And so Queen Rhaenyra climbed the steps and seated herself on the Iron Throne. Legend has it that as she left the hall later, blood trickled down her legs and hands, proving the Iron Throne had spurned her. Nonsense. It's a chair made of steel blades. Rhaenyra had wanted it all her life and had sacrificed 2 sons for it. She likely gripped the damn thing too tight.
When Rhaenyra's last son wed Aegon's only daughter, the Dance of Dragons officially ended. Ashen burned men, all that was left of the Riverlands. 2 scared children spouting oaths they didn't understand, all that was left of the mighty House Targaryen. Ancient skulls and hatchlings that grew no bigger than cats, all that was left of the dragons.
To steward his monument to vanity, Baelor summoned the High Septon of the Faith from his ancient seat in Old Town and gifted him with ornate robes and a crown of crystal and gold. And like a fool, the High Septon put on his lord's motley and danced at his lord's table. And with each passing year, the High Septons fell ever lower. How can the flock be kept safe from wolves when the shepherd sleeps in their den? Baelor himself appointed a simple-minded stonemason, believing him the smith reborn. And when he died, Baelor replaced him with an 8-year-old boy, whom Baelor had seen speaking with doves that answered with the voices of the seven. Still, the common people revere Baelor as the Blessed. They tell of how he forced a High Lord to wash a beggar's feet, fasted to tame his unnatural lusts, and walked the bone way himself to make peace with Dawn. Many Septons and Septors even claim that Baelor rescued his cousin, the Dragon Knight, from a snake pit, because no viper would strike a man so pure and holy. A lie. Baelor was bitten 12 times and was bedridden for half a year. And yet he didn't die.
When the last dragon died, it was only a matter of time before the Targaryens followed.
By only, you mean another century?
Which they wasted trying to replace their lost advantage, incinerating their own palaces to hatch dragon eggs, drinking wildfire to become dragons, and let's not forget the Mad King's favorite, burning men alive so he could pretend to be a dragon.
Kingslayer. A word every man and woman in Westeros spits at me, though many can't even name the king I slayed. I understand. To them, I'm a symbol of everything they'll never have and a warning that'll never apply, so they can loathe me from the safety of their small lives. But when a dog goes mad, we put it down. Why not a king? Serve the king's pleasure, as he burned Rickard Stark alive and strangled his son, inciting the rebellion. I defended the king's honor against courtiers as his generals lost battle after battle with Robert. I kept the king's secrets when his pyromancers hid caches of wildfire beneath King's Landing. I gave the king counsel when my father's army was at the city gate and Grand Maester Pycelle lied that my father had come to save him. Many forget that I also tried to defend the king from harm. When the Lannister soldiers poured through the gates, it fell to me to hold the Red Keep as the only king's guard in the city. I knew we were lost and sent to Aerys, asking his leave to make terms. My man came back with a royal command. Bring me your father's head if you are no traitor. Aerys would have no yielding. His pyromancer was with him, my messenger said. I knew what that meant. Aerys Targaryen was alone in his throne room when I found him, picking at his scabbed and bleeding hands. The fool was always cutting himself on the Iron Throne. Burn them, he kept muttering. Aerys had decided to let Robert be king after all, over the charred bones and ashes of King's Landing. He must have thought his pyromancer was near enough to obey him, but I'd killed him a few minutes before in the courtyard. As I approached the throne, sanity flashed behind the king's eyes for a moment, just long enough to read the look in mine. His eyes grew huge and the royal mouth drooped open in shock. He turned and ran. A single thrust was all it took to end the greatest dynasty the world had ever seen. Beneath the empty eyes of the dead dragons on the walls, the last dragon king squealed like a pig and shat himself. So easy, I thought. A king should die harder than this.